All right, I would like to introduce tonight's guest. I'm going to go paperless here. Our guest tonight is Frank Nicotera, who is currently Chief Administrative Officer and General Counsel for Milwaukee World Festival, Inc., the nonprofit corporation which owns and produces Summerfest. He is responsible for all legal, insurance, and risk management matters. Let me get a little bit more here with... Is that thing feeding back? Let's see here. All right, I'm going to tell you a little bit about the organization he works for. So Frank manages legal, human resources, purchasing, and risk management functions for a 501c3 nonprofit corporation with annual operating revenues in excess of $35 million. His corporation is the owner and producer of Summerfest, an 11-day music festival with an annual average attendance of 875,000 attendees. The corporation also manages and is responsible for development and operations of Mayer Festival Park, a 75-acre location near downtown Milwaukee, which hosts cultural events and festivals that annually attract over 1.4 million visitors. His duties include co-managing the annual budget process with the CFO, negotiating and drafting sponsorship agreements for Summerfest and the venue, including stage sponsorship agreements in excess of $25 million. Participation on construction committees in connection with over $58 million in managing the acquisition of former industrial properties contiguous to the festival park for use of office storage and warehousing space. In compliance with state and federal statutes regarding artists negotiating contracts, local intellectual property licensing, establishing and monitoring compliance with federal and state regulations, including ADA, Wisconsin DNR, EPA, OSHA, those are all regulation organizations, and FLSA, and developing new policies for human resources and purchasing. He's also a really good jazz drummer. With roots here in New Orleans. He's worked with many great musicians here in New Orleans. So I welcome Mr. Frank Nicotera. Frank, please have a seat.
I got a seat. Am I on?
I think you are. All right.
Kirk.
Sure.
Hey, everyone. Spread out all over the place.
So,
I always sit in the back, so let me just wave to folks in the back.
So tell us a little bit about Summerfest. 875,000 people. That's a lot of liability, isn't it?
It is a lot of liability, but it's 11 days, noon till midnight every day. We don't go 11 straight. We take a Monday off.
Okay.
And we've had crowds as large as about 125,000 on one single day. We like to try to average around 85 to 90,000. The 125,000 was during Summerfest 2013 when we had the Imagine Dragons as a grounds headliner. And from the time we booked them to the time they came to Summerfest, their sales just skyrocketed, and they became one of the hottest groups in the country. And that was actually a very scary situation for me because we had too many people at the venue where they were performing. So that's the pluses and the negatives of the business. You want people to come out, but if they all concentrate in one area, then it causes me to get even more gray hair. So but the festival's been around. This year we'll celebrate the 48th year of Summerfest.
48th year.
48th year.
Okay.
It was started by the mayor of Milwaukee back in 1968, Henry Mayer, which is why the festival grounds are named after him. And it was his attempt to develop a festival for the city of Milwaukee that would bring people together. We're a little bit different than a lot of music festivals because we have a 75-acre park that we manage. We have permanent stages. That's attractive to a lot of bands because it's for those who are rigging lights and rigging sound, it's permanent. It stays up there for most of the summer, so it's not a lot of last-minute things to do. The stage houses themselves are constructed according to international building codes, so we eliminate the type of situation like you had several years ago at the Indiana State Fair, where you had a stage collapse and a number of people were killed and injured. So we are one of the only venues in the country that has a dedicated permanent location, or as permanent as you can get in Wisconsin. It's a 3-season location because we're not going to do any events there in December or January or February.
It's a little snowy there, huh?
It's a little snowy, it's a little cold. We also have on our site a 23,000-seat amphitheater that has about 10,000 seats under cover. And a lot of our biggest acts perform in the amphitheater, and that's done under a separate ticket. We pride ourselves, though, when you look at the grounds, what we refer to the ground stages. Last year, our ticket for the Summerfest ground stages, the general admission ticket was $18, which in comparison to a lot of the bigger festivals in the country is just the best bargain in the world.
What's Jazz Fest now, $50?
I think so.
$50, yeah.
65.
For walking in, yeah.
Wow.
That's great. Has anyone been to Summerfest here? Anybody here? Has anybody ever here been to Milwaukee?
All right. Does anyone here like to drink beer? You should go to Milwaukee.
Their baseball team is named the Brewers for a reason. So, well, good.
And as you can see, one of our, well, it's not on that, as you scroll through the sponsors, our main sponsor is Miller Coors. And it's a historical fact. When the event first started, Milwaukee was the home of Miller Brewing Company, Schlitz Brewing Company, and probably one that some of you are familiar with, Pabst Blue Ribbon. So each, I just know the demographic from looking at the stats.
So we have Miller
Nothing better
Lite,
than a tall can of Pabst Blue Ribbon, a nice cold can of Pabst Blue Ribbon on a hot summer day, provided you're old enough. But anyway, when Summerfest started, each brewery sponsored a stage. So that was kind of a legacy thing. And as Pabst went out of business and Schlitz went out of business, Miller kind of took control over all of the grounds. They're our ground sponsor and they're a stage sponsor. And without companies like that sponsoring, you can see some of them back here. Without the companies sponsoring Summerfest, there's no way we could offer an $18 general admission ticket. We concentrate on companies that were headquartered in Milwaukee. Miller was headquartered in Milwaukee. Now the joint venture between Miller and Coors, which is known as Miller Coors, is headquartered in Chicago. Harley Davidson, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, Harley Davidson is headquartered in Milwaukee. Their main manufacturing plant, all their major designers are in Milwaukee. They are a stage sponsor, and I'm probably going far afield here, but
no, that's good.
One of my favorite things in the 8 years that I've been at Summerfest is in 2008, I was the head of the project team for building a new Harley Davidson stage. And I sat through design meetings, and I got to sit through several meetings with Willie G. Davidson, who is the grandson of the founder of Harley Davidson. And it was great to see these folks pick out certain colors that represented their brand, but also represented the feel that they wanted from the music that was going to be placed on that stage. They were really serious about it, and he had an art to it, and he was just a master of it. And he made sense of it. We spent about a month picking out the right color bricks. I remember standing outside in the middle of February in freezing cold weather because Willie G wanted to see what the bricks looked like at different times of day. So, but they've been a great sponsor. Briggs Stratton, you may not know much about the company, but if you look at your lawnmower or a neighbor's lawnmower, more than likely the motor was made by Briggs Stratton, and that's another Milwaukee company. Johnson Controls is a worldwide company that's headquartered in Milwaukee. That grouping with BMO Harris Bank, which is actually the Bank of Montreal, but they bought a large bank in Wisconsin. Those are all our major stage sponsors, and they contribute in the low to mid six figures each year, and that helps offset our costs. Some of the bigger ones like Miller, Harley, BMO, and Briggs Stratton also contributed millions of dollars to help us rebuild their stages.
So your organization is like what the Jazz and Heritage Foundation is to Jazz Fest. It's a nonprofit organization that operates and runs the festival.
That's exactly right. The one distinction is that the New Orleans Jazz and Heritage Festival Foundation has a contract with Festival Productions and AEG.
Right.
And that's who books all the music.
Right. And y'all do everything
We
yourself.
have our own internal entertainment department. And we use a couple of contractors to pick some to book some of the niche music, but all of our headline acts are booked by our own staff.
And these organizations donate to the nonprofit, so it's a benefit to them so that they're giving to a nonprofit. Oh, that's great.
It is.
It's really important that you have that money coming in to keep the ticket prices down, to be able to pay the bands, be able to have the right vendors, the food vendors, and all that. And you handle all the contracts with not only the sponsors, but with the acts and with everything having to do with legal liability and everything.
Everything from the marketplace vendors who might pay a couple $1,000s to sell their creations during Summerfest to the multi-million-dollar sponsorship deals. When it comes to artist contracts, most of the time you're at the mercy of whatever contract their agency's using. So one of the things that I did in my second year, the first year I just kind of took everything in. That was 2006. But the second year I developed, in the music business they call an attachment or an exhibit or an amendment to a contract a rider. A lot of the old people you'll talk to will say, well, what does the rider say? And a lot of times the rider just talks about the amenities that the band's going to get. But our rider is real extensive. It talks about the things they can and can't do on the site. Now most of them don't care about that. They'll do them anyway. There's a famous story. We have a little time.
Sure, plenty of time.
At one point in the history of Milwaukee World Festival, they sponsored Winterfest, which itself was a bad idea because no one wants to go outside in the winter in Wisconsin.
Right.
But so they had a comedy component to it, and the only available hall that they could find to do comedy indoors was at the basement to St. John's Catholic Cathedral in downtown Milwaukee. So our entertainment director, who was kind of young in the business, called some friends who did comedy and said, hey, you got any hot up-and-coming guys? So they said, we got this guy that's just going to knock them dead. So it was Chris Rock. So
in the basement of the church.
In the basement of the church on a Saturday night when they had Saturday night mass upstairs. So Bob went up to Chris Rock and he goes, listen, I always hate to tell an artist that they can't do certain things, but we're in the basement auditorium of a Catholic church. And they have a mass that's going to start about a half an hour before you're scheduled to go on. So you might want to temper some of your routines. And he goes, oh, Bob, he said, I understand that. He said, I got a lot of Catholic friends. I would never come into a Catholic church and say anything that's going to upset the priest or any of the parishioners. And he said, great. So he went out there, and for like the first 30 minutes, he calling Bob every name in the book. He said, this guy came in and told me that I can't say, and he went through every word you don't want to hear while you're going to Mass on a Saturday evening. So
the riders in your band's contract, a lot of times they'll agree to it, but they just ignore it.
Sometimes they ignore it, but we lay everything out so they can see it. When we give them the offer, we also give them the rider and say, here are certain conditions that we insist on. For instance, as a lawyer, and this is a totally mundane, not very exciting point, but we're a nonprofit company. And while we have $35 million in revenue, we're still a nonprofit. So there are certain things that I insist on. We've never had a dispute with an artist, but if we did, one of the things I insist on is that the jurisdiction or any claims be filed in the state of Wisconsin. Well, my first year there, some of the agencies, like William Morris, said, no, it's got to be California or New York, and we said, absolutely not. So now it's just routine, and they accept it, and they go with it. But I thought it was better to just lay stuff out right up front, and you know where you stand. And that seemed to work pretty well. There's one that I developed one year because the band's crew, you know how many guitar players are there out there? Any? Okay, you know how you guys, I have a son who's a guitar player and a bass player, but you know how you just can't get enough of your pedals and all your distortion things, and you have these pedal bags and all. So their crew set him all up, and he had a special type of distortion that he was going to go back and step on with his heel, and apparently they put it in the wrong place, so when he was dancing around, he stepped on the side of it, fell on stage. This was a bass player, not a guitar player, so I don't want to make any disparaging remarks about guitar players. That's you.
Hey, no sweat, no sweat.
So he fell over and broke his ankle, and then they wanted to sue us, and I was like, well, wait a minute, your crew set it up. So now that's in our rider. If your crew sets up the stage, and you go on that stage accepting their setup, then if you get hurt because of something that they set up incorrectly, that's your liability, not ours. That's some of the stuff that I deal with. I know that's not the sexy stuff in the music business, but it's the stuff that gets people sued, and it's the stuff that makes small festivals go out of business because they don't pay attention. They don't pay attention to the risks, and there's a whole lot of them out there. One of the benefits we have in Wisconsin is that as a nonprofit, there's something called recreational immunity. So unless one of our employees just flat out punches somebody at an event,
yeah,
they won't beat us in court. If they say I slipped and fell because some drunk bumped into me and I fell over, too bad.
What's it called in Wisconsin?
It's recreational immunity.
Okay.
There's no equivalent in Louisiana unless it's a Mardi Gras crew throwing coconuts.
Oh, okay. Or beads and hitting someone in the eye.
Or beads, or throwing cabbage off of Irish Parade.
Right.
You also have, you're insulated from liability in that case.
So you've got the different, I'm going through a couple of the different bands that played there last year. There's a list of bands here. Some of y'all might recognize some of these names.
Well, we had, the only summer show that Usher did in the country last year was at Summerfest. And I think he used it as a rehearsal for his current tour, but it was excellent.
Cheap Trick, I saw them recently, a couple years ago. They actually rock pretty hard.
They still do,
Yeah.
and now Rick Nelson's son is playing drums in the band.
Cool.
And they're an old Chicago band. When I was like 16 years old, I used to drive down with friends down to Waukegan, Illinois, which was a pretty wide open city north of Chicago. They never checked IDs. So we would sneak into music clubs, and Cheap Trick played there frequently, along with Styx and REO. They're kind of lame, but Cheap Trick was always a good rocking band.
It looks like you have a lot of the, it kind of looks like you have some of the bands that play like Gretna Fest, and then you've got some of the bands that play like really hip mountain festivals too. So it's like a nice mix of a huge demographic. I mean, you've got everything from Trombone Shorty to 38 Special to the Nitty Gritty Dirt Band.
Well, Trombone Shorty first played Summerfest in 2008 as a 3 o'clock in the afternoon band that probably got paid about $500. And every year I've known Troy for a long time, since he really was Trombone Shorty.
Yeah.
And so this year he was a headliner, and he probably got about 30,000. So. And you know what? He's going to get more. He just did a showcase. There's an organization that some of y'all may want to check out because it might be a good, maybe you know about it already. It's called AIBA, the International Entertainment Buyers Association. I've talked to their annual convention in Nashville the last couple of years, and he did a showcase this year in Nashville that just blew everybody away who, I guess hadn't focused on him.
Yeah.
So, but we did. I try to get as many. I give the entertainment department a list of at least 10 New Orleans or Louisiana acts every year. Because I don't want to tell them how to book bands, because I don't want them telling me how to practice law. But,
right.
Some people just don't know, and you got to clue them into what's happening down here. So
Cowboy Mouth?
Cowboy Mouth is a regular. People in Milwaukee love Cowboy Mouth.
Sure.
I guess because Fred beats the hell out of the drums and kicks him off the stage.
He yells a lot and very entertaining.
Yep.
Yeah, so I'm just going down this list. It looks like it goes forever.
We have a lot of country acts. Country music sells big. And the one thing you got to understand when you get in the promotion business, there's a lot of bands that, I get all excited about when I'm out in public. I wouldn't probably not pay to see those bands, and I won't tell you which ones they are. But when you're in a promotion business, you got to get used to sometimes biting your tongue And you put them on stage because they're going to sell a lot of tickets and they might sell a lot of beer. And I know that's probably a very corporate way of looking at things and maybe distasteful to some. I would certainly like to book true musicians all the time, but like I tell people all the time, if I booked the music I liked at Summerfest, we'd probably go bankrupt. But sometimes you just gotta bite your tongue. If you're picking to be in that side of the business, well then just get used to promoting stuff that you probably wouldn't want to see in your basement. So we don't have basements here. I'm sorry.
Have you, other than that, have you had any acts that you, and you don't have to name them unless you really want to, any acts that just were either like musically like terrible or unprofessional that you just never want to have back again? Are there those regularly, or for the most part is everyone fairly professional and you want them to come back?
I hate to just generalize because that's not my personality and it's never been the way I've been, but I can tell you that the biggest trouble I've had, and I mostly deal with the road managers. If we have problems during Summerfest, it's with the road manager. I had a run-in with Jeff Beck's manager. That was my own fault. We were trying to decorate our office. So Jeff Beck was playing, and his drummer is a guy named Narada Michael Walden, who I had seen when I was a freshman in college at Marquette, another great Jesuit university, in Milwaukee. And Michael Walden was the drummer for the Mahavishnu Orchestra. Who besides Jeff knows who that is? Good. Yeah. So, and then he was down here one time for Jazz Fest when I was in law school at Tulane. I was playing drums with a sax player in New Orleans named James Rivers, he'll still plays every Thursday night down at Irving Mayfield's Jazz Playhouse. Is that what they call it?
Yeah.
So, but Michael Walden was playing with somebody, I can't remember who, but we were hanging backstage. That was the old days of Jazz Fest where backstage was like a tent and a picnic table. And we just sitting there and talked and kept in touch over the years. So I wanted to go backstage and say hi. And this guy gave me all kinds of grief.
Jeff Beck's manager.
Jeff Beck's road manager, because Michael Walden was playing drums with Jeff Beck. And I said, well, would you at least give him my card and tell him I said hello? So, sometimes, what goes around comes around, and sometimes it takes years. The old line is, revenge is a meal best eaten cold.
I don't know that one.
Maybe it's just a lawyer line. But maybe I heard it in The Princess Bride. I can't remember. But that evening, after they finished their performance, and this was in the days before they used my electronic signature, I was one of 2 people authorized to sign checks. So they're waiting for their sizable check at the end of the night from the stage manager, and the stage manager says, well, I need a second signature on it. He goes, well, get one. He goes, yeah, I would. He said, except the guy that's got to sign it is the guy who you cursed out back here on the loading dock this morning. So then he was nice to me because I was signing a check for a lot of money.
That always makes people nice.
Yeah, it does make them nice.
When you're the guy with the check.
And this is not a generalization. My experience is that the performers who really have chops, who are great musicians, are the easiest to deal with. The Bonnie Raitt's of the world, who's been out there playing and, sometimes in obscurity with some spikes in popularity, but she's got chops. The Zac Brown Band, whether you're a fan or not, those guys are excellent musicians.
Yep.
And they're just a class act.
Yeah.
He brings his own chef with him. They have one truck that's nothing but the chef's equipment. He lays out the food and invites all of the stagehands that we have working for us to eat with them. Any of our employees who are back there, from the kids who are sweeping the hallways to the electricians who are there to make sure nothing goes wrong, he invites them all back. He's a class act, and there's a direct correlation between the guys who are really good musicians, and maybe they're confident in their abilities, so they don't care about all the other trappings, they don't cop an attitude.
Also, the people that are the people that write the checks early on in their career don't want to deal with a headache.
No,
right?
That's true.
They want to, so it's kind of the nice people that get through the gate, with the production companies and the big, people that write the check.
Generally, that's true. But then sometimes you got to take the bad with the good, because you got to bring in the popular groups that are selling
Right.
You know,
That sell
millions,
tickets.
millions of downloads and CDs, and they're going to, you know, they're going to sell out the amphitheater, and everything's going to be good.
Because they made their money without even worried, you know, they made their money before they even got on the stage. They made it through downloads and YouTube visits and that sort of YouTube
and pre-sales.
Pre-sales, yeah.
The amphitheater is like I said, I don't know if there's a shot of it. You see the large building with the smile on the face right there in the corner?
Right.
That's you can see. I don't know if you can see it very well from
right here. Oh, there's a
that's
smile on the face right there.
That's our corporate logo, and we actually trademarked that logo before Walmart started using it. But whoever was there as in-house counsel back in the 70s kind of screwed up. But the amphitheater, the way those big shows work, and if you've ever worked with a promoter or even in a smaller venue, we guarantee some of the bands. We guarantee that they're going to make X. With some of the biggest acts, it could be $1 million or more. We guarantee that. And that's based on, you look at the history of what they've done at other venues around the country. You familiar with Polestar?
Yep.
Polestar is like the Bible for our entertainment guys. You look and you track what those bands have done. And once we get to the point where the ticket sales exceed $1 million, then there's a split built into the contract. And we share part of the ticket revenue with the band. That exercise after their performance can sometimes take a couple of hours. We have our staff accountants there. We now have everything that goes up on video screens so that instead of people looking around crunched over and looking at a bunch of numbers, they can see the spread. Ticketmaster handles all of our ticket sales. So we utilize some of their programs to deal with the settlement. There's a lot of things that come into play with the settlement. I talked about catering before. Yep. Sometimes we provide catering. If they provide their own, then they get a credit for some of that. There are costs related to if they use pyrotechnics on a show. Then that means that the city inspectors have to come in. There's all kinds of permitting issues that have to be done. We have to have certain emergency personnel on site in case something goes wrong. And there's expenses, and all those little expenses come out. And all that's done by the time that band gets back on the bus and hits the road and goes to the next venue. But there's splits. There's also a split on merchandise. We sell it for the band. We have a crew that sets up tents all around our amphitheater, and even for the headline bands on the grounds. They sell it for the band, and then we negotiate what percentage we get. It can be as little...
Different per band?
It's different per band, and like for instance, in 13 we had the Eagles. There was no way we knew we wouldn't get more than 10% from them. That's just the way their management is. So we got 10. Other bands we might get up to 20 or 25.
Was it worth your while to have that 10%?
Oh, sure.
Because they sold all kinds.
They sell all kinds of merch. My first year at Summerfest in 2006, our entertainment guys had booked Panic at the Disco. But they got them real cheap. I think they paid like $5,000 for the band. But once again, they booked them in December, and by the time June rolled around and it was time for Summerfest, this band was charting real high, and their shows were doing real well. And they get to Summerfest, and they literally sold every T-shirt and hat that they had on their bus for their whole tour. And this was the third show. So although they only made like $5,000 in the guarantee, they made over $25,000 in merchandise sales. So, you know, come up with a nice logo and a fancy design on a T-shirt, and after people watch your show and they've had a few, then they'll $30 for a T-shirt. Oh hell yeah, that's cheap.
So when a band comes to play at Summerfest, for example, or any festival, but specifically for Summerfest, what sort of rights do they give up? I mean, can you use their image on your marketing, or is that built into the contract? Can you use their audio to sell later or to use to market the festival? What sort of rights do you work into the contract where the musician might have to say, yeah, I really want to play Summerfest, and giving up this right is okay because it benefits both of us? Mm-hmm. What sort of rights are those?
Well, most of our stages have image magnification. And so we let them know up front that we are going to show them at the event, but we don't record it. We may ask certain groups if we can record a clip to use for advertising for the next year.
We say magnification, you mean the big giant screens on the side that have the
LED.
Yeah, LED.
And using music is a lot more difficult. Some of the up-and-coming bands are much freer with it. Mm-hmm. Older groups, from my generation, the baby boomers, they don't give up anything. They won't, even if you tell them it's for a charitable cause, they say, okay, what charity? We'll say, well, us, we're a 501c3, but they don't see it that way. So we're very cautious about that. We could get the licensing and use it on our website, and we go back and forth with some of the copyright licensing agencies over what's considered advertising, where we might use a clip to show that they're coming. Now, when you see when we do some of the what we call buzz reels, or when we have the bands on the website prior to Summerfest, you hit the band and it might play one of their clips. That's with their permission. But afterwards, we're not trying to use their music, because then you got to deal with not just the band, but you got to deal with the songwriter, the record label, if there's a separate publishing agreement, and it's just a myriad of things we have to deal with. And since I'm the only one there that really knows how to do that stuff, I really don't want to. And I don't think there's a benefit to it. There's enough stuff on YouTube that if people want to hear a band perform, they can go do it. We've talked to YouTube. We actually have an agreement with YouTube right now, but they weren't able to sell it to a sponsor to sponsor live streaming from Summerfest. 11 days is just too much for them. Sure. So the bands all let us use their photographs, and they'll let us use them for a certain period of time. We have a program at Summerfest called the Emerging Artists Series, where we seek out unsigned groups, or those that are on the verge of signing, and they used to submit their music and their press kit through Sonic Bids. I don't know if you're familiar with that company, and we use Sonic Bids to kind of filter out, and then we would pick and choose from some of the better bands that came through that process. And now a lot of those unsigned bands will give us the rights to use their music for a year, and that's all we ask for. And we'll feature that, because that's another medium for them to have their music played. And I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but with the demise of record companies, except if it's pop or country, live performances are the way that bands sell their music, or at least get people to go someplace to download their music or sell their music. So if we keep it on our site for a year, a lot of those bands tell us that helps, because it's, if someone searches them and said, oh, here they are at Summerfest, and they get the performance, then they'll take the next step and hopefully track down their music and download some more or buy some more.
Okay,
So.
I'd like to open the floor up for questions. If anyone has some questions, is there a mic running around?
Is this on? Hey.
Oh, hey, you have a mic?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, thanks for talking. It's kind of like a one-part clarification, one-part question. You said the split points, is that only on the amphitheater, or is that on the fairgrounds as well?
What was the first part? I couldn't hear you.
Speak up.
The split point, you mentioned there being a split point. Is that only for the grounds, or?
No, it's only for the amphitheater, because that's a hard ticket.
Okay,
Those are reserved seats and a hard ticket. And then on the grounds, it's a flat fee. So a grounds headliner could be anywhere from, if they're playing on a Tuesday night, which is one of our smaller nights, it could be a $10,000 to $15,000 band. And then it'll range all the way up to about $125,000. If it's some particularly, some really good group that is coming through, well, we might go a little higher than that, but that's kind of that's kind of the range.
Okay,
and you get a lot of good headliners for that, in that 50 to 100 range. You still get a lot of good ones.
Okay, and I guess the second part of the question is, for the split point, I mean, and you may not know the answer to this, but when you're dealing with these agents, is it more, do they like to negotiate more on the guarantee side or the split point side? Like, do you just offer the guarantee and then, negotiate, how many tickets need to be sold to sell, to get the split, or is it the other way around?
It depends. I mean, it obviously depends on the artist. The established artists who have a year after year after year record of selling out big venues, they want to push hard on what that split's going to be. Some folks who are going out with a new type of setup, a new type of format, they may want the guarantee. But most of the big acts, those that know that they can sell at least 15 to 16,000 tickets, we work out a split with them. That's what they want. Sometime the argument comes in. For instance, this year we had Dave Matthews Band, and this was the first time in a long time we had Dave Matthews, because he had usually played another venue in southeastern Wisconsin called Alpine Valley that can handle about 45,000 people, and they have camping and all that kind of stuff. So the argument there came down to them wanting a split of our concessions. And that's like the only thing that we really had a chance to make money on. So we went back and forth on that for a while, and we were able to work it out. And just as we thought, it was a sellout. He had that was kind of a nice show. He had Gary Clark Jr. You guys familiar with him?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
One of my favorite young guitar players. And I was surprised that, because we had Gary Clark Jr. on a smaller stage, and he did a great job. But playing in a big amphitheater like that, not every band can handle it. You sometimes have to build up to that, but he sounded great. Dave Matthews, on the other hand, who I've followed since he became popular, I was a little disappointed. It almost seemed like at some points it became routine. And I know if there's Dave Matthews fans in here, you're going to start hitting my Facebook account and Twitter and telling me I'm a fascist and I should die tomorrow. But I'm being honest with you. And that stuff better not get repeated anyplace else, or the guy will never come back to Summerfest and I'll get fired. Any follow-up? Did I answer your question okay?
That's great.
Looks like we have one more question.
So in your position, how much do you actually get to enjoy the festival and go see acts that you want to see and stuff?
If I try to stop in the amphitheater every night to catch at least one song, and also to look around. I always go in when the band's finished with their setup and their sound check to make sure they didn't do anything stupid.
You're in charge of liability.
I'm in charge of risk management too.
Yeah.
For instance, we had Motley Crue. This was their final tour. I say thank God it's their final tour, but and I had and just full disclosure, I never paid for a ticket to see that band and probably wouldn't have, but I worked at the place, so I went and walked in, and they set up this thing that looked like a roller coaster, and it was and Tommy Lee's drums were supposed to go out over the crowd on this roller coaster, then come back around, and he tried it during the sound check and said, "No, I don't think so." And I was so happy because I could just see that thing falling down on top of about 2,000 people in the front row. And after hearing the band for like one or two songs, I realized why I never bought a ticket to see them. But I try to go in the amphitheater every night. It's interesting to see what some groups are doing. It's interesting to see the groups that really play and those that are maybe not really playing. And I'm not going to name any names there. This year I did get to go hang out and watch Trombone Shorty. He and I hopped in a golf cart and took a ride down the amphitheater because he wanted to go say hello to Bruno Mars. So that was kind of cool. And he was cold because our opening night it was like 50 degrees.
Right.
And for a guy coming from New Orleans
That's
up
cold.
to that was cold on
Summertime.
June 25th. So if I get out, if I see one band play a whole set per year, then I consider myself lucky. It's always something. It's always something. One year I was watching Gary Clark Jr. the first time he was there, and I was getting into it, and I got a call, and I was at the northernmost part of the grounds. You have a pointer? It was I was in this. I was all the way up here, and they called me to tell me that we had an ADA issue, an Americans with Disability Act issue, at the amphitheater. And the only way to get there is to walk through the grounds. So I walked. And the issue was, at the top of our amphitheater, it's lawn. The lawn seats are the cheapest. You just sit out in the lawn. But that amphitheater was built in 1986. The Americans with Disability Act wasn't passed until 1991. So certain portions of the amphitheater are exempt from compliance because actually we can't. The hills that they put in, the steps that they put in, we'd have to tear the whole thing down and start over. And the law doesn't force you to do that, although it's always changing. So a young lady in a wheelchair, her friends carried her up to the grass, which is sloped, kind of like this upper area here, but it's on grass. And she was arguing with our ushers who said, you can't be up here in the wheelchair. We'll move you down here to these nice seats where you can easily get in and out in case of an emergency. And she wanted all her friends to go. And we said, well, we'll accommodate you with a few, but we can't do all 10. And anyway, I walked all the way down and missed the rest of Gary Clark's show. So when you're in the business, it's rare. Unless you're stage managing, where you're on stage and you're watching what's going on. What I do, I'm dealing with all the craziness and behind the scenes stuff, which you have to deal with. Sometimes I deal with simple problems. I deal with complaints from customers. One of the ways I deal with them, I offer them tickets to come back to Summerfest the next day. Nine times out of 10, that resolves the problem right there. We want people to have a good time. That's the business that we're in. And if they've had a bad time, then I got to find a way to work that out. I have a whole crew of mostly interns who help me with that. They screen the calls. They know the routine, and we try to work it out right on the same time. And that way they're not going home angry and stewing about it. They're not calling up the newspaper or a television station and complaining about it. So you want them to come back and have a good time because that's why we're in this business.
Well, good. Well, y'all, let's give a big round of applause for Frank Nicotera.
Thank you.
Thanks, Frank.
Hey,
Thanks
fun.
so much.
That was fun.